name. Yeah. Ed Pandolfino, Pandolfino. I didn't join WFO till 2005, but my first exposure was actually 5 years before that when I was on my way back from doing Purple Martin surveys in the Tehachapies. And the conference that year was in Kernville. And the person I was working for stopped by the conference. And I hung around for about a day, didn't actually really join the conference or the organization. And it really wasn't 5 years later, 2005, till I actually became a member. Uh, I think the reason I was attracted to it is that um, I came to this whole thing as a birder. I should say that I started as a scientist. I have a PhD in biochemistry. I had a career in the medical device industry. Had no interest in birds until 1992, and then suddenly overnight became obsessed. So I became a birder first, retired, and then I became interested as well in the scientific aspects of birds. And I found WFO is the only organization that seemed to be equally welcoming to birders and ornithologists, and in particular to birders who were interested in the science of birds. Yes. Yeah, it's kind of strange that I was so oblivious to birds because I'd spent my life outdoors, hunting, fishing, backpacking, was interested in nature, but I didn't know anything about birds until 1992. And that year, we had recently moved into a house in Pleasanton that had these ceiling to floor windows on one side. And I started kind of not even meaning to, seeing these birds right up close to the window. I mentioned that to my daughter, and she bought me a Peterson Field Guide for my birthday that year. I thought, well, that's a strange thing to do because I'm not interested in birds. And then one day I saw this little bird right outside the window, and I thought, oh my God, this must be something really exotic from must be from the tropics or something beautiful, kind of orangey sides and these ruby red eyes and a black cape, a black kind of hood over it, and looked up in the book and found out that it was what we then called a rufous-sided towhee, now a spotted towhee. And when I found out that that bird was dead common, and that I had essentially missed that my whole life, the spectacular looking bird, I literally went instantaneously from oblivious to obsessed. And from that moment on, all I wanted to do was learn about birds and learn how to identify them. And that's kind of why it took me so long to get there. Yeah. It's my spark bird, and actually, I found a lot of other people had that same species as their spark bird. At the time, it was called the rufous-sided towhee, which is a good name. It's now called the spotted towhee because we split that bird as two different species between the east and the west. So nobody got to keep the name rufous-sided, which is too bad because it has rufous sides. It is. Well, I was president and vice president, or vice president 2 years, president 2 years, past president for 2 years. That's kind of the standard process. I tell people that when you agree to become president of WFO, it's a 6 year term or a 6 year sentence almost. But I was just mainly just a board member. From very early on, I got involved in particular with the conferences. So for most of that time, whether I was president or not, I was the head of the conference schedule and was from about, let me make sure I've got the dates right. Oh, from about 2009 until 2014, I really ran the conferences and reorganized that whole aspect of the organization. So that's probably been my main contribution, other than my time as president. Okay. Well, a little bit of background first. So prior to that, for most of the years of WFO's existence, the conferences were pretty casual affairs, and they weren't, very tightly organized. It was just, people getting together and talking about birds and going out and birding. And financially, I would say we usually either lost money or broke even at best. And what I really focused on from the beginning, and particularly through once I've been there around a few years, is I recognized that two important things: that WFO members saw WFO really through two things. One was the journal, Western Birds, and the second was the conference. That's really what most members, that's their main interaction and the main ways that they touch WFO. So I said, well, if we don't do anything else, we've got to do those two things right. And I felt like we could do a lot better job with the conferences. And the second thing was that, and this has always been true, our membership dues do not pay the cost of publishing Western Birds. It doesn't come close. So in order to stay viable, we knew that we had to find ways to raise money separate from the membership dues because they didn't want to raise those enough. And the conference was one way to do that. So the main things that I did was make the conference a lot more formal, a lot more professional, a lot more well organized. I really wanted it to be absolutely smooth. So even though if you've ever run one of these things, there's constant chaos behind the scenes. I wanted to make sure that the attendees never saw any of that insanity, and that they just had a really great experience, and they'd be willing to come back and pay for the trips and pay for the entrance fee. And really, from that point on, I don't know, Sean, you can tell us whether it's true, but we began to make a significant amount of our money from the conferences each year, and that's helped to keep us alive. Oh, really? Yeah, I should guarantee there was chaos. And when I finally stepped down from that, because nobody, if you haven't run one of these things, nobody has any idea how complicated it is and how much is guaranteed to go wrong and how much you can never, ever assume that anything you have planned with the hotel is going to actually happen. So I wrote up, I hope people are still using it, but I wrote up when I stepped down from that what people started calling the Bible in WFO, which was about, probably a 300-page tome, taking everything from deciding where we were going to go next year, finding the right venue, negotiating with a hotel, all the way through to the nitty gritty of running the conference. So I hope that is something that people are still using. Well, this one pops up right away, but I'll bet you hear about this one from other people because I think it was kind of an amazing thing, and it particularly tells something about the nature of the WFO membership. And I can't remember what conference it was. Maybe it was in Santa Rosa. I'm not sure. But we have, the other than the field trips, the main focus of the conferences are the scientific sessions. And they count on, and usually the interesting thing is that almost everybody who attends will show up for those. So, there'll be 200 people packed into the room and all the audio visual and all the presentations that people are given. At the very beginning at this conference, the power went out. We had a complete power failure. And we wound up essentially kind of playing it by ear. We had 200, 150, 200 people gather around one laptop in the middle of the room, and we did the whole scientific presentation on a laptop. So that was pretty amazing, and the people were great about it. I mean, it was nobody complained. Everybody, did their best to see what was going on, and nobody. I don't think we got a single complaint about that from members afterwards. Yeah. Hmm. It's probably the scientific sessions, especially when we see. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm reading the little lead in. Yeah, but I think my favorite part of the conferences, I think I like it all, but my favorite part of the conferences has to be the science sessions, and particularly when we have a lot of students that are maybe giving their first or one of their first presentations, and it's WFO is a lot more welcoming atmosphere than maybe some of the more traditional ornithology organizations. So it's a good place for, a young student to get their feet wet and not necessarily feel threatened by the intellectual nature of the audience. So that's something I really enjoy. I enjoy participating in it, and I enjoy watching it. Yes. Yeah, we were coming back to San Diego that year, so we a number of folks on the board said I think it would be really important for us to review the history of WFO, and so I essentially was the keynote speaker, and I had to put this together. It was pretty intimidating. We knew at that meeting we were going to have almost all of the founders of WFO present, including Pierre, and so we thought, okay, we really got to do this right. And I so what I had to do is kind of go back through to some extent people's memory banks, but that's always questionable. But a lot of the old issues of Western birds tell me when different people got on the board, who was president, where we went in our conferences. But the real challenge was I needed this to be spiced up with a lot of photographs from way back when. And that was the hardest part is finding photographs because everybody that I talked to had thousands of photographs of birds, but they didn't have many photos of people. But I managed to pull it together finally, thanks to a large extent with John Luther, who had a bunch of really great pictures. And we had a lot of pictures that were, humorous. Like we had Guy McCaskey crawling under the fence of some reserve that he wasn't supposed to go into. So a bunch of things like that. So, and, funny little things of, John Donne, in a pool and other sorts of things. So we managed to find enough pictures that not only I think everybody got seen, but we had a chance to have a little fun with it as well. Yeah, this will be a great archive. And I'm so glad that you were able to do it while Guy was still around. You can edit that part out, but I'm really concerned about making sure we capture Guy's. Oh, can't really think of anything in particular. And I came to the organization way after it would have been formed in 1970, so I wasn't really involved with a lot of those folks. I met a lot of them for the first time at that 2014 conference. The main reason I think someone should be interested in joining WFO is because of kind of what I said earlier, that it's the one organization that is really for ornithologists who are interested in birding and birders that are interested in the science of birds. And I don't think any other organization balances that as well. It's equally welcoming to traditional academic ornithologists as well as to just birders who have some interest in something besides just ticking birds on their list. So I think if you're in that category, if you're someone who has gone beyond just birding, then this is a place to be. If you're an academic ornithologist who has a real enthusiasm for birding as well as the science part, then it's also a place for you. Well, I think it's just exactly what I said, that it really does strike this combination of being welcoming to birders who have some interest in science and scientists who have some interest in birding. I don't think there's any organization that does that. There's a lot of birding organizations. There are a lot of scientific ornithology organizations, but I don't know of anything, at least on a broad regional scale, that really combines those two the way WFO does. To me, what makes, well, let's talk about Western birds in particular, but other things as well. What really makes Western birds stand out is that it's really the one peer-reviewed scientific journal that is open to what people often call descriptive ornithology. So this is describing, birds' behaviors in qualitative terms, status and distribution information. If you look back at any of the traditional, AUK or any of the standard ornithology journals, up until maybe the late 1970s, maybe late 1980s, that's pretty much what was being published was was descriptive ornithology, and that's gone completely out of fashion in the academic world. It's kind of like you can't get a master's or a PhD for doing that kind of work. It's got to be something theoretical or genetic, which is great, but it's almost as though that stuff isn't important anymore. And it is. We're constantly learning things. I'll give you an example that I've been personally involved with that really points up how much we need places to publish this sort of stuff. In the last few years, I have led complete revisions of three different Birds of the World accounts. This is a site that Cornell maintains. It's kind of the go-to place to learn everything you can about a given species, and it's supposed to combine all of our knowledge. Well, in every one of these cases where we did these essentially complete revisions of ones that were done maybe 30 years ago, they're full of exactly that kind of descriptive information. And what we would find again and again, that things like basic breeding behavior, how many eggs they lay, how they behave, how the male and female interact, how they build the nest, almost everything that's been published in it was published 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. And a lot of these things have changed. Climate change is changing a lot of these behaviors. And yet you don't see this sort of stuff published anywhere except Western birds. And another thing about it is that it's very the peer review process can be pretty intimidating, and for somebody who's just starting out, it can be very frustrating. And the peer review process, very deliberately at Western Birds, is very welcoming and very helpful. So somebody who's never published before or isn't that familiar with exactly all the do's and don'ts of scientific writing, you can, Phil and the associate editors will work with you, will help you, and we'll get you through that process in a way that the journals, like all the other major ornithology journals, just don't have the time or space to do that. If you put in something that needs too much work, they just say, well, send this somewhere else. But WFO will work with people to try to get them in, and that was I think that is really appealing, and I wish there were more journals that did that. That's a very long-winded answer, but you edited it down to well, I always give those folks two pieces of advice: is no matter whether you like it or not, learn statistics and learn GPS, because those are two skills that will help you get a job. And ultimately, you probably got into this because you were interested and it was fun. If you want to get a job or you might be able to do interesting and fun stuff, you need those two skills. Um, I'm not a statistician myself. When I write papers, I need to have somebody else help me with it. But if I was up and coming, those are the two things I'd focus on. Kristen's hand is up. Oh, did I not do that? Okay. If I just do a little bite now, you can splice it in. Yeah. Well, if I was going to give any advice, in fact, it is the advice I give to young ornithologists just starting out, it would be, I'll let you guys edit it from there. Okay. All right. No, actually not. I looked through the ones, and thanks, Sean, for sending me the kind of list of what sort of things you guys are going to be asking. I thought that was pretty thorough. I really can't come up with anything else. I really look forward to seeing this, and especially seeing what some of the other folks said. So, any idea how long this is going to take? Hmm. Okay, I'm trying to think who might not have been at the conference. Did you? So I assume you've interviewed Cat Waters. She's on the list. What about Robbie Fisher? Okay. Well, at least and you can splice this in as well. But a lot of the work that I did. So we're still recording. Okay. A lot of the work that I started with improving the conferences, I did in conjunction with Robbie Fisher, and really she and I were a real team in kind of turning these conferences into something really different. So if she doesn't get interviewed, she at least deserves to be recognized for that, as well as as the treasurer for many years, as you know, keeping us out of jail, which is always important. Okay, I will stay here until you tell me to go.